Welcome to Conversations with Dez. I'm your host, Dez Blanchfield. Today I have the pleasure of being joined in the studio again by Kevin Jackson, who's dialing in from the USA. Kevin, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Des, great to catch up with you again. I just flew into Denver for a cybersecurity conference, and I really wanted to talk to you about Berlin. That was a great trip.
Was indeed. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us again for another Conversations with Dez. So Kevin and I just returned from an amazing week in Berlin. We were with Bosch at their Bosch Connected World 2019 event. We're going to go through some of the highlights, but one of the things I would like to share is that we learned that this event has been running for a number of years now, but has in effect doubled year on year. This year was across 3 separate halls. There was a main hall for keynotes, a demo, and show floor with an amazing number of spaces. Go and see everything from automotive, manufacturing, which we'll get into in a minute, and partners showing their wares and their various capabilities with and alongside the team at Bosch. And then a third hall for a series of breakouts for hackathons that ran for the whole week. And some amazing bits of hardware outside as well, which we'll get into in a minute. So Kevin, we've got a number of key exciting things to talk about. I'd like to start with a couple of the big ones. So automotive, connected mobility in particular, is about 66% of the market for North America, according to Mike Mansuetti, the president of Bosch North America, who we had the opportunity to get on camera, and we'll talk about in more detail in a minute. Agriculture, connected agriculture, and all things around agriculture, farming. And I know you've got some great anecdotes about what you saw on the pavilion and the agricultural demo in space, and certainly some highlights around what some of the projects we're doing with water management. We saw a number of exciting things, and I'd like to ask you about a couple of those in a minute. You saw a really big piece of hardware that hummed, which we'll get into in a minute about what they're doing with sensors. And then I'd like to come back to the automotive piece with some of the projects that we saw coming out of the innovation centers with smart parking, head-on collision avoidance, and things like that. Kevin, let's talk about agriculture. I know you've got a lot of passion in the space, and you were quite impressed with what's happening with the water management with some of the projects in Africa. Tell us what you saw in the agriculture pavilion.
Yeah, so one of the things I was really shocked about, to be honest, was how much the Internet of Things, these connected things, are really affecting our lives today.
Right.
I learned about the project in Africa and the Caribbean where Bosch sensors are being used for water management. They call this a water digital grid across, and nonprofits are using this to keep track of water to ensure not only that the people can drink, but that the crops can drink also.
The thing that struck me with the demo, they had some amazing real live spaces where they had sensors in the ground. They had atmospheric data coming out, all the usual things with heat, temperature, barometric, rainfall, waterfall, water flow. The thing that struck me was a lot of the things that have been designed by the team at Bosch and their partners were essentially what we were used to seeing with some of our normal technology in the plug-and-play model, that you could walk along and put sensors on the ground. They immediately start capturing data, feeding that back through different types of connections, which we won't get into today. What was your sense on the ease of use and the ease of adoption with some of the technology we saw? Did you get the sense it was plug and play and easy to adapt to immediately? Did it seem to be the case that these were easy to use modular platforms and tools?
Well, in my mind, I see the opposite of technology as a farmer. Yet there in the Bosch Pavilion, and actually out in fields around the world, they have a connected milk container where they can pasteurize milk straight from the cow. And the farmers use an app to make sure that it's running properly, it cleans itself, that it's at the right temperature. And if there's any problems with the facility, it notifies the farmer, and the farmer can come and fix it. So this connectivity, connected agriculture, is putting milk on the table.
I like that. Well, my son would be very pleased to hear that his breakfast cereals are going to continue to be kept cold with tasty milk into the future.
Yeah.
Now, one of the big areas that I was very excited to see Bosch doing some amazing things in was the connected mobility piece. Now, this is planes, trains, automobiles, ships, and so forth. But let's talk about connected automotive. I had the chance
Yeah.
to catch up with Bernd Heinrichs, and he shared some stuff they're doing around the e-scooters and things like that around the small cities, and booking those sorts of facilities for ride sharing and so forth. We also spoke to Thomas Kropp, who talked about some of the innovation centers they're doing and development in artificial intelligence. But I think the one that impressed me around this whole space was Mike Mansuetti. I mentioned him earlier. He was the president of
Yeah.
Bosch North America. He gave me an amazing stat. 66% of what Bosch are doing in this space with connected mobility is cars on the road in the US. Now, you know, with the greatest respect to North America, we know that they're obsessed with cars. But I think when we think about cars,
Yes, we are.
we used to think about it as a form of transport, getting from point A to point B. But one of the things that I'm learning about in the economics of what's around a car is that cars are no longer just a form of transport. They're a part of our lifestyle. And not just getting to and from the shopping, getting to and from dropping the kids to and from school, getting to work. But a car is more than just wheels and engines. It's computer systems, it's software, it's artificial intelligence, there's cybersecurity. And now we're looking at sensors collecting data and feeding them back in real time for different types of services. I'd love to get your thoughts on one of the projects in particular. There was this collision detection type project where it was called Wrong Way Driver, I believe. And this was designed to tell you that if you were a driver in a car and you made the mistake of turning the wrong way onto a freeway or motorway, and you were heading in the wrong direction in either a one-way street or going onto a freeway into an exit ramp rather than an entry ramp, it would warn you and let you know that you're about to get into a situation having a collision. Now, I know with the amount of traffic that's in the US in particular, this would be a really powerful feature for your market space in North America, surely.
Yeah, well, I was in General Motors up in Michigan a few months ago, and they were telling me how their whole business model is being changed, and it's focused on providing an experience for the passengers in the vehicles. And this is not just vehicles that you own, but vehicles that you ride to provide entertainment, to give you a sense of well-being. And sensors are critical to that sense of well-being, to having that experience. And it seems that Bosch is right in the middle of creating these bubbles, a bubble around your vehicle. And the vehicle talks to other vehicles, creating these smart contracts, using things like artificial intelligence. It's just amazing how much technology is being put into the Internet of Things, and the speed at which this information and data is being transferred. You know, it takes very high-speed data to keep you from getting in an accident.
Well, this is the whole thing about this Wrong Way Driver program, right? It was feeding you real-time sensor data from the car, a very low-cost thing to implement from what I understood. And you know, my view on this is that there can be no more compelling sales pitch than the capability of saving lives. We all got a vested interest in this. Now, there was another project that I believe it was, I'm just trying to remember my guest. In fact, I think it was part of the conversation I had with Bernard Heinrichs, and there's a video on that. So if you haven't had a chance to do that yet, jump on the YouTube playlist or look at the connections below in the description for the URLs. And what Bernard was telling me is that they've got this program around smart parking. And the way he described it was essentially a search engine, and we won't name any brands of search engines, but a search engine where we would normally get online and web search for websites or look for various things or find bookings at hotels. This was a search engine for parking stations and parking spaces. And as you were driving around, the car was constantly looking at where it was on the maps, what sensor data had available from various places to park, and gave you real-time insights onto where you could park, how long you could park for, the best prices. Now, I think when I go to a shopping center, I just dump the car and run. I don't really think about it. And then I get to the end of the parking experience and there's always a sticker shock. There's this experience of $20, $30, $40, $50 to park for 2 or 3 hours when I'm shopping for clothing. I think we're going to see more and more of this because there's a higher and higher demand and increasing use of vehicles. I'd love to get your thoughts on the value of having this capability of the car telling us not just where to park and the availability of parking stations, but to be able to do a negotiation, whether it's smart contracts on a blockchain and the economy of things, or just simply a smart decision of a directory of places to be able to park at the best rates and how long for. I mean, this seems to me is a fairly fundamental game changer in an obvious way, I'm sure you've got some insights into kind of how this might change people's lives for the quick in and out, pick up and drop off for the likes of dry cleaning versus all day parking or long-term shopping.
Well, you can imagine that you can get a email or a text from your clothes that's in the cleaners. It senses that you are nearby, and it will tell you, instead of going straight home, why don't you come by and pick me up because I'm ready to go? Or your refrigerator will tell you that, hey, why don't you stop by the store? And there's a parking spot right in front of the store. You can go and pick up a few things. But earlier you talked about, planes, trains, and automobiles. Well, I saw this huge Rolls-Royce engine for trains that also had sensors, and a big agricultural tractor. I mean, this thing was humongous. In fact, when we walked into the event, it was sitting right there. I can't imagine how all of these things, these disparate items, different industries, are talking to each other, exchanging information, making these agreements, and it's all on behalf of us. I don't know if I'm ready for my car to make an agreement with my clothes.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Now, there are a couple of other points we'll get into around that, particularly in the space of the cars and their ability to make decisions around smart contracts for power and recharging and other various things. The industrial space of manufacturing, robotics, and so forth. So we've generally talked about the big topic of connected mobility, particularly what's happening in some of the space of the cars. We've had a bit of a quick run through some of the agricultural things. I will come back to you with regard to that big engine because I was fascinated by what looked like one of the biggest things that went hum I'd ever seen. But yes, I'm glad you brought that up. As we walked in, there was this gargantuan machine that was a piece of agricultural machinery. I think it did everything from plowing to digging holes and putting posts in the ground.
Yeah, we did the China.
Yeah, it was giant. And I wish we were there to see it drive in. The other thing that I'd like to briefly get your thoughts on was the manufacturing space. So we've talked about connected mobility and automotive. We've talked about connected agriculture. One of the other big themes was the connected manufacturing space. Everything from the machines that go hum, as we talked about, through to, I guess, on the plant and equipment, robotics, engineering, everything from building parts for planes, trains, and automobiles, through to refrigerators and appliances.
Yeah, let's not forget the connected home. I tell you, after I went to Berlin, I actually was seeing how important it was to be able to have sensors around your home. I went to my local hardware store and bought a camera. They're very inexpensive. And now I'm sitting in Denver and I can see a video of what's happening in my front door, my screen house, and my patio. I can change the temperature in my house. This is just today. The technology is not something that's in the future. It's there now, today.
Well, there's a number of interesting things that come out of that, isn't it? I mean, once you've got that device, streaming content to various places, and I'd like to circle back to the cloud challenge in a minute with you, because I know this is one of your key strengths. That device you're talking about in the smart home, the connected home, it's providing the video. The thing that interests me is that not only are you getting a service from that with its default plug-in work, but I can imagine with the relevant technology that Bosch is designing now and the third parties that they're working with and their partners are adding value, I can see a situation where not only can you stream it real time when you're alive or you're available, but if you were either asleep or in a meeting or on an airplane or somewhere and unavailable to watch it, you can have a third party then gain access to that securely with permission, potentially on a blockchain controlled smart contract, to then add remote monitoring whilst you're offline. Or somebody could do alert management, such as, I don't know, maybe a wild animal gets inside a window, you've left the window open. Tell us about some of the things you saw.
That only happens in Australia, those wild animals.
What were some of the highlights you saw from the smart home connectivity piece at the show? I mean, there was a lot to see. We spent a couple of great days there. Give us a couple of highlights in the smart home, the connected home technology you saw.
Well, one of the things that really surprised me was that Bosch has its own cloud, and they have this world-class software development team, and it has sort of a plug-and-play application foundation that can really make anything smart and Bosch is in every type of industry vertical. That said, be like a Bosch. One of the things they had a video of was the lawnmower, and the gentleman was laying down, taking it easy, and his lawnmower was taking care of the grass. This I need one of those.
Yeah, you and me both. Actually, you reminded me of the like a Bosch. I thought it was really neat when the star of that amazing ad campaign halfway through the CEO's opening keynote, and I was really impressed by that opening keynote. When he walked in, he was in a shirt and tie and smart pants, but no tie, shirt and jacket, sorry, but no tie. I loved his anecdote. I loved his anecdote about the transition from a fairly formal organization with an engineering background, as you said, to now a more agile, I guess, creative and nimble organization. And the thing that really struck me when he was sharing that anecdote about the shift to a slightly more relaxed organization with creative thinking was he said they didn't have to send out a memo advising people not to wear ties anymore. They just stopped wearing it.
Right, exactly.
So much so that when I think it was one of their key partners around energy management came on afterwards as the second keynote, he noted he took his tie off behind stage. But we saw, was it Sean, the gentleman on the bike, came in halfway through the CEO's keynote and was talking about some of the different technologies that were involved. But what was really neat was he rode in on a bike that was connected, alluded to the fact that he booked the bike to get there, that he parked the bike at the end of the stage and put it back into the grid. The bike needed to be charged, so bike warned him with sensors, my battery's low. They connected it on the edge of the stage to charge it and were able to look at a smartphone and see how much the charge was and what the cost was. We see these shared pieces of equipment around the place of bikes and scooters, but we don't always think about the technology. Tell us about what your thoughts are around this challenge of the shift between cloud and edge. I'd like to talk about the edge in a minute, but I'm keen to get your thoughts on the transition from whether it's design patterns or just the approach on how we adopt these things as we're putting on devices, whether it's shared bikes or cars driving around or whatever the case might be, or big machines in the field. There's a lot of data moving around. What are some of the challenges that we're going to see people face as they start to put some of this technology from Bosch in the field with the blend between, I guess, private cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud, and then what I'd like to allude to in a minute with the edge compute piece?
Well, one of the things people don't think about is the economics of all of this. I mean, you think about an airplane that's flying, the company is paying millions of dollars for maintenance, and you would say, well, of course, they're going to spend a lot of money to monitor the engines to make sure that the plane can keep flying. But we saw how a bicycle, which is not a lot of money at all, can economically use connectivity, can tap into this Internet of Things to really help the user, to make sure it's charged, to make sure it has directions. And all of this is being driven by the economics of cloud computing. Cloud computing is really morphing into a hybrid IT world, which leverages both the public cloud and the private cloud. And even telecommunications companies, as we transition into the 5th generation environment, they're doing exactly the same thing, where they have a cloud core and they have services layered on top of this cloud core. So the public cloud, the private cloud is enabling ecosystems across multiple industry verticals. And this is helping us in our daily lives. Living like a Bosch is really about knowing about everything around you across all of these different industries, being able to get that information, use it effectively in order to better your life. And the thing I was really impressed about Bosch is their concern about the environment and the future of our Earth. Everything that they're doing seems to be focused on helping humans not harm the Earth.
That's a great point. Yeah, I had exactly the same sense. And I know when we had dinner on the final night in our hotel one of the things that struck me as we were sort of debriefing on it was that humanities focus that you just highlighted, and I'm glad you highlighted
Yeah.
that. I love the fact that all of their design thinking, all of their agile principles, all of their implementation, the services they've got available, the devices they're building, as you said, they're all centered around that, I guess, design thinking focus on humanities, making life better, safer, cheaper, easier, more convenient. And you summarized it very nicely with that comment with regard to living like a Bosch, because it is. I think that's the underpinning theme that maybe people haven't always obviously grasped, that living like a Bosch, with the play on words of living like a boss, is about leveraging technology, but at the same time letting technology leverage what it knows about you to make your life better. Now, I had a great conversation, and I'd like to circle back to cars in a second and talk about the edge-to-edge piece. I think there's an interesting transition from, as you talked about, private clouds on-premise and in their own data centers, public cloud out there, which we've all known about, and the hybrid connectivity between those and where you move different types of data. One of the things that I'm interested in is what they were talking about with the edge network, edge computing, edge networking. We've seen this with mobile phones. When we think about mobile phones, they're a device on the edge of the network. They can capture photos, they can capture video, they can push it up into a public or private cloud, such as the media companies have, where they're hosting files, or hosting video, or hosting whatever the case may be. But I think now we're at the point where as these cars are moving around, as trucks are moving around, as agriculture's moving, as robots inside these big industrial sites and manufacturing plants, not all of that data can easily be moved to a centralized cloud. So I liked what Bosch was doing with regard to the focus on bringing capabilities to the edge as well, and that is where it made sense, either from a time and risk point of view, so a robot keeping some of the data locally, making fast decisions about its proximity, making sure it doesn't run into a human, because we don't want a robot to take 6 seconds to work out that there's a human 2 seconds in front of it. So I like what they're doing with the blend between centralized private and hybrid and public cloud, and the pivot to leveraging edge computing and edge networking. And I think there's a whole separate show to be done around that. But one of the really great case studies that we had the opportunity to look at, which I'd like to just briefly share with our audience now, was a conversation I had with Nick Sharman, and there's a whole video around that as well. I had the chance to interview him, as you know, and I think you were my paparazzi, and thank you for that, getting some great shots. I had a great conversation for about 15 to 20 minutes with Nick Sharman. So he's the project director for all things around the economies of things. That's essentially the smart cousin of distributed ledger technology, what people often refer to as blockchain. And they had an interesting project, a use case they built around a car. And they put a lot of intelligence in the car as it moved around and became aware of itself, but also a lot of intelligence in a distributed ledger in the form of a blockchain type technology, where they built this concept called the economy of things. And this was a model where each of the economic value propositions around what was happening in the car, around the car, near the car, and even remotely away from the car in the form of fuel pricing, power pricing, availability of places to plug in. He told me this great anecdote, which again, people should have a good listen to and watch of this video where he dived into the detail. But in essence, to summarize it before you watch it, this car had the ability to be aware of where it was, where it needed to get you to, and the power that it needed to get to and from was an electric car. And if it needed a charge, it not only gave you the options of the locations to charge and the price points, but it could negotiate its need and demand for that power. So the thing that I visualized, and again, I think this is something you'd love to circle back on, but before I do that, I had this picture in my mind, the car driving along, negotiating through a distributed ledger with a smart contract saying to 10 or 20 different power providers, in 8 minutes, I'm going to be at this location. I need a charge point. Please book it for me. That's part one. Part two, I'm 40% full, so I need 60% top up. That's going to be 20 minutes of charge. That's going to be this much power and volume. I'd like to wholesale it, so please give me 10 charges prepaid. And then to the point where I can imagine that the power station can actually generate that power on demand. And that is that the network could move the power to that location where the charge was on demand. So think about a moving vehicle negotiating in real time its location and its ability to buy that power on demand, off demand, low, high, whatever, and then go and drive itself to there, or we would drive it, plug in, and the power to charge that 60% of the battery was demand generated, as in the organization producing the power, putting it into the grid, was producing as they need. So in the next 5 minutes before we wrap up, I'd love to get your thoughts around what that's going to mean with not just automotive, but other things of the on-demand buying, the economies of things, and not just blockchain, but distributed ledger capacity to to do that negotiation on demand of things all around us, including power?
Well, when you were talking about the electric car trying to find power, the thing that popped into my mind is today, the buddy charging, where you can take your cell phone and charge your buddy's cell phone. So will we be driving down a highway and negotiating with the car next to us to exchange power? It's not too distant future, I think. So this is how our lives are being changed by these sensors, this ability to communicate, to transmit information, and know more about the world.
Indeed. I can see a future where right now I know that I might drive 5 minutes to get someone to get cheaper petrol, for example, in our car. I like the idea that I can buy the power to charge my car in advance and get a wholesale price off peak, and then have the network deliver that to where I need across the grid to charge at my behest. So I don't have to go to a convenient place where the fuel is stored because it's petroleum. I can go somewhere in the grid that's convenient to me to consume those electrons. Now, in the next 5 or 6 minutes before we wrap up, there are two other things that came out of this whole event, which is exciting, and we were really grateful to be there. Industry 4.0, which I'd like to just get a 60-second summary from you on, and then the future work, which I'd like to speak about for about a couple of minutes with you. What was your general sense of where we're at in the maturity curve with Industry 4.0? You know, there's it's a big topic and a lot of talk about some of the concepts around it. But when we think about this transition to smart industry, give me the speed dating 60-second version of what your sense was, or where we're at with what had to show us all and the thousands of people there, with a pivot to Industry 4.0 and intelligent infrastructure.
Well, a lot of people seem to be afraid of the robots. They think the robots are going to come and take their jobs. But by looking at how Bosch is leveraging their technology, the humans are actually getting better jobs. By letting the robots and Industry 4.0 take care of the drudgery, humans can do more important aspects where they can leverage their brain. They can think of new ways. So I think that Industry 4.0 is actually going to release humans to do what they do best. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that as we shift to this Industry 4.0 model, we pivot to it, we're getting smarter things, more intelligent things. And again, it brings me back to that point that there can be no more compelling sales pitch than the ability to make life safer and more comfortable. Finally, a couple of minutes before we wrap up now, because I know we're running out of time. The future of work was an underpinning theme that maybe didn't get as much fair share as some of the exciting things like robots and so forth. Let's just talk for a couple of minutes around the future of work. For me, you know, I've had the ability to travel around the world, as I know you have. I've been able to work from home and client sites and in my own offices. I think the concept of future work is shifting dramatically, though, and that is that work itself, the word work, means something very different these days, and you alluded to that with regard to us using smart machines in Industry 4.0. What's your 60-second summary of what we saw in Berlin at Bosch Connected World 2019 and what it meant with all of that technology, what it meant to what the future of work's going to be like?
Well, we as humans will need to start negotiating with these robots, these intelligent things, to enhance our own work.
Right.
So the future of work is just that, being able to work anywhere, everywhere, at what you love. So all this technology, all this connectivity, the connected industries really can allow us to deconnect from the world, to be unconnected and connect with humans. And that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Kevin. It's been great to get your insights. Let me just summarize kind of what we've had. So it's an amazing week in Berlin, in Germany, with the team at Bosch, and we're very grateful to be there. Can't wait to come back next year. There were three main pavilions. There was the hackathons that were running through the week. There was the main stage where the keynotes and the presentations were taking place. We had a great time taking in all of those keynotes and presentations, and an amazing opening by the CEO and Sean, who rode on the stage. The big key themes around connected mobility, connected manufacturing, the smart home and connected home, and all the appliance components, connected agriculture, Industry 4.0, and the future work. For me, I'd like to close up with the fact that I think that, well, what I believe will be an exciting world in that we're, as you alluded to, we're untethering. We're no longer stuck at a desk stuck at a workstation that's on that desk plugged into the wall. We're working with
Right.
smartphones, smart tablets, smart devices. Working means doing smarter things and making decisions, leveraging that smart technology, using the data from the sensors, leveraging the Internet of Things and the industrial Internet of Things, which Bosch is doing some amazing things on. And as you alluded to, a more flexible, agile lifestyle where the things around us are making us safer. They're making it easier for us to get around. They're making it more cost effective to do all of these things. I see a world where the future work for me, and what I saw from this week with Bosch, was a safer, more calm, relaxed, fun life and lifestyle because of that future work pivot that we're seeing with using machines to do some of the laborious, heavy lifting things, the dangerous things, us being the intelligent component in that, our ability to work from almost anywhere for many jobs, obviously not all jobs, the ability to negotiate with smart contracts using the economy of things, as Nick Sharman alluded to in the interview we had with him with the car. I think where we're seeing this go now is that there's almost, and I know you talked about this when we were heading out to the airport, the seamless integration is really the big thing I think Bosch has achieved in the ability to build this intelligence into devices and sensors, integrate it into these key themes of automotive and mobility, manufacturing, agriculture, Industry 4.0, the future work, in such a way it's cost effective, easy to adopt. It was plug and play on any type of network connectivity. And, for me, I've got a couple of young adults, a daughter and a son. You've got some older kids. I think their future is very, very bright. And I think you'd probably agree with me that, when I wish I was 20 or 30 years younger, because some of the things I'm seeing now, particularly what we see this week, was not just exciting, but was inspiring. It was I left really excited about what the next 3 to 5 years has got ahead of us. But I think we've got a very exciting 12 to 18 months just seeing these things come to fruition. And I think this event did a really great job of conveying that. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. We are living in, our science fiction. Years ago, the things that we read in books and in magazines was what we are living today.
Yes.
I just can't imagine what my kids and my grandkids are going to look at, how they're going to live.
Indeed. Well, folks, we're going to wrap up there. Thank you very much for joining us. Before we run out of time, just a quick summary. Make sure you join us on.
Thank you.
The hashtag is #BCW19, Bosch Connected World 2019. We are on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and all the other platforms. And jump online and look at all the videos and interviews and blogs that we've seen. There will be descriptions below. Kevin, thanks for joining me. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thanks again for tuning in, folks. I'm Dez Blanchfield, your host, and you have been tuned into Conversations with Dez. We look forward to having you join us in our next conversation, either in podcast or video form. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.